Good evening. Welcome to The Next Word. I'm your host, Chris Warnke. And tonight we're going to have a conversation with Beth Solomon, who is the Managing Director for External Affairs for CARE. When you give back to the world, you get back for America. And that's exactly what CARE does, worldwide in 94 countries. And it's truly a wonderful organization. And it started with a small care package. Is that right, Beth? It started with a small care package around the world in World War II.
It did. It was an initiative by some women in New York who wanted to do something for refugees in World War II. Remember, at the end of World War II, there were many people who were homeless. They'd been driven out of their homes, and so the women in New York got together and they started sending these care packages. And they were sending them into Eastern Europe, into Germany, then into Japan to help those who'd been displaced. And it made a huge impact. And so fast forward 70 years, CARE is now in 94 countries.
Amazing. I had no idea it was in 94. I mean, your reach is phenomenal. And it's changed, of course, over the course of the 70 years with a focus on women and girls.
Exactly.
Which was a radical move.
It was a radical move at the
20
20 years ago,
right,
to focus on women and girls. Then the thinking behind it is when you focus aid, and it's humanitarian aid and it's also development aid,
right,
in other words, addressing the deeper roots of poverty and how to lift people out of poverty in the long term. It was realized by people who do this work that if you invest in women and girls, you lift entire communities up, and the money doesn't get lost. And when you educate girls, you also create equality in these societies. And so that's our focus. It was a radical idea when we started doing things that way, but now it's considered best practice in humanitarian and development aid. There's an interesting statistic about it, which is there's something the World Bank does called the World Poverty Index, and it indexes the poorest countries in the world. And they do another index that is where women are the most disempowered. And the interesting thing is the poorest countries are also where women are the most disempowered.
Right.
So when we lift them up in these societies, the whole society benefits.
Oh, absolutely, and that's been proven time and time again. And wherever you are, I mean, look at India or Afghanistan. And so I know you have a very thriving and impactful project in Afghanistan, educating women and girls. Talk a little bit about you've been there, CARE's been there since 1960,
right?
Which is phenomenal. I mean, people weren't talking about educating women in Afghanistan in 1960. Certainly in this,
This is true
in our world
and
today.
we also do health and basic medical services there, but in the 90s, CARE really started focusing on educating girls, and this is a particular issue in rural areas, and so since that time, CARE has started hundreds of schools, and the number of educated children in that time in Afghanistan has gone from 1 million to 9 million.
Really? Wow.
So it's a big change for that country, and I think the leadership of that country now, and Mrs. Ghani, Rula Ghani, the First Lady, she is an extremely strong proponent of saying, it's the girls who will create the future of Afghanistan. And again, we know that the Taliban and some of these radical groups out there, they also happen to keep women down. And so I think part of what we're looking for, I think everybody's looking for in the future of the world, is a place where there's less radicalism, where everybody has a chance to succeed. And certainly educating girls is part of that equation. And so we've really been focusing on that in Afghanistan.
Very successfully. And look at the women leaders that have come out of the system today, I'm saying, from Afghanistan. I mean,
true.
They're now in government. They're in the universities. They're very much a part of the economy, which they weren't certainly 20 years ago.
True.
10 years ago.
True. And we see that in other countries too.
Yeah. Give us some examples of.
Well, we started a project in Bangladesh. Now, Bangladesh is still a poor country, but it used to be desperately poor. And in the 19th century, they had a crop called indigo. It's sort of the color of your shirt, and it's that dark blue. And there was a lot of exploitation associated with it, much like the cotton crop in the United States. It was practically associated with slavery. Then there was a rebellion, and a conflict broke out, and 15 million people died of starvation.
Oh my God.
So indigo in Bangladesh had that kind of not very nice history. But CARE started a social enterprise called Living Blue, the blue, of course, referring to the indigo, in which we've gone into communities. Indigo, turns out, is a really good crop that helps rejuvenate soils to get them ready for producing food. And we worked with women artisans who know how to make these beautiful silk scarves, which have been designed by Hermes and Louis Vuitton, beautiful quality scarves. Now, this social enterprise is owned by the women artisans there in Bangladesh, and it has changed, you know, the lives of tens of thousands of women. One of the things that we see is that you also need to work with men. And this we heard at the Afghanistan event. You cannot go into a place with your American lens on or your Western lens on and just work with the women, because the men have to approve and support it. And so CARE spends a lot of time and energy, I know they do in Afghanistan and in a place like Bangladesh, working with the community, working with the whole community, the husbands and the wives and the daughters and the sons, to introduce an idea that might be radical at the time. In the case of Bangladesh, it was a woman working outside the home, a woman having an income. And I've seen this work in Jordan and Syria too, where you have to get the whole family to accept it before it can be successful. Same with educating.
Really, it's like everything.
And then some of the men started doing chores around the house in Bangladesh, because they realized if their wives had a little more time to do this work, which they then considered to be dignified work, it was bringing in income to the family, and then everybody supports it. So this doesn't happen overnight. It takes a lot of work in the community, and I think we've been working in Bangladesh on this particular project for 10 years, and it takes that long to get somewhere. And just tonight, the National Museum of Women in the Arts unveiled these scarves at the museum shop. So it's wonderful, you know, because the museum is really the main museum in the country that spotlights women artists and artisans.
Oh, that's fabulous. So I know you're the Director of External Affairs, and you do a great job in fund development, which is a whole. Where do you get a lot of your money? Comes from government sources, or a portion of it?
About a third of our money comes from, that is funding for these programs, comes from the U.S. government and other governments, USAID and the equivalents in Germany, France, Australia, Canada. About a third of this funding comes from foundations like the Gates Foundation. I believe we are the top funded organization for Gates in the things that we do. And then a third of it comes from individual donations, and that's the part where I work. These are people giving $5 a month, or in the case of what we saw the other night in Afghanistan, individuals who might give hundreds of thousands of dollars over the years to help specific programs that they care about.
And they work.
And they work.
And as an example.
Yeah, in Yemen, for example.
Which is important.
200 CARE employees are working in that horrible situation in which 70% of the country is at risk of starvation because of the Saudi coalition-led blockade that is stopping all food and aid coming in. You know, it's a proxy war between Saudi Arabia and Iran. But it's the people who are suffering, 28 million people suffering, and cholera affecting all these children, which is ridiculous because there's a vaccine for cholera, but it's a shortage of clean water and so forth. In any case, CARE has 200 people there. 98% of CARE employees are working in their country of origin. So in Yemen, for instance, we have 200 people there, but only 3 of them are from outside the country. The rest are Yemenis. Really? And that's kind of how we do things. So we're not parachuting in and parachuting out of a country. It really, part of the CARE model is we want to put ourselves out of a job. So we're starting programs, we're innovating in education and advocacy where we want, if we want good ideas to grow and become part of the fabric of society, and then, you know, we don't want to continue the aid. We want people to be able to have the wherewithal to stand on their own 2 feet and support themselves. Exactly. So this is kind of part of our strategy, the advocacy model built into the aid itself.
And you've been, well, certainly you've been around for 70 years. And of course, we've talked about the fact that the focus has obviously changed from having a group of very courageous and very giving women in New York. And, you know, you think as a child, you know, you think, oh, I'll send a CARE package. That's where it coined from, correct?
That's it. CARE, the acronym, originally stood for Cooperative Assistance for Refugees in Europe.
That's what it's
and of course, we don't use the words anymore because we're in so many countries, but it's the same spirit. And the psychological lift that these refugees got from somebody somewhere sending them a pad of paper and some pencils or some shoes, you know, I think in those original CARE packages, it wasn't even that everything was new, but it was people thinking about people and trying to help. And that is the spirit that we work in today.
And nothing takes the place of people to people. And it's been proven many times over, and what you all do is phenomenal on the ground. Because you're dealing on that level where you've got people that understand the culture, that speak the language, that, you know, empathize with their fellow people, you know, their fellow community members. Makes a big difference.
Exactly. And I was hearing from the ambassador of Kosovo that CARE started an innovative program with adolescent boys called Be a Man. And the objective of that program was to help boys be respectful of girls.
That's great.
But the program called Be a Man, and the program was so embraced and successful in the country that the Department of the Ministry of Education took it over, and it is now part of the curriculum for every student in Kosovo. So these are the kinds of things you look at the Me Too, and you look at the problems we have in our society. Of course, problems for women are much worse in other countries where there's no place to file a complaint and there's no EEOC. But working at that community level, whether it's with the artisans in Bangladesh or working with communities on child marriage in Syria and Jordan, or working with teenage boys about how to respect a woman and what it is to be a man. This is how we can make long-term change, we hope.
So we're going to go back. When we come back, I want to know more about you, how you got to this point. But this is very inspirational. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back. So we're taking a short break. You're watching The Next Word, and we'll be right back.
You've messed up your son's haircut. Do you try to fix it? Work with what you've got? Or show solidarity?
Thank you, babe. You don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care will love you just the same.
Welcome back. I'm your host, Chris Warnke, and we're having a conversation with Beth Solomon, who is the Managing Director of CARE, a worldwide humanitarian effort that has been going on for over 70 years. And 70 years, I mean, Beth, I had no idea it had been that long. And being from the roots of World War II, and then, you know, it's gone through many transformations, and here we are today. And the impact that you all have had on every men, women, girls, boys, I mean.
We reached 80 million people in 2016, and our goal, Chris,
Wow,
in 5 years is to reach 200 million
wow.
people. So
in 5 years.
In 5 years.
Wow.
So it's a very ambitious goal, a $2 billion campaign to reach 200 million people. So it is radically upscaling our ambition and what we want to do, because we see the need. I mean, there are more displaced people in this world today than ever. And in fact, you mentioned World War II. The Washington Post called these 4 famines that are going on in South Sudan, Nigeria, Yemen, and elsewhere in Africa, called those famines the worst humanitarian crisis since World War II.
Oh, yeah.
So it's we know that this work is needed now more than ever, and we really have to ramp it up.
Yeah. You're headquartered in Atlanta, but you have offices all over, really, the major cities.
We do. We're in about 10 cities in the United States, and then, of course, we're in 94 countries. So we have quite a footprint.
Okay. And you've started the Global Leaders Network, which is great. So how do we get involved? I mean, how does someone watching tonight?
Terrific. Well, the CARE Global Leaders Network is an effort to make the practical case for humanitarian and development aid. There are many people out there who will just feel it, and they want to do it because it's the right thing to do. But in this political environment, in this America First environment, we need more friends. We need more friends across the political spectrum. And so this campaign is to say, yes, it's charity, but it is also a very practical thing to create global stability and national security. And so we've involved generals like Admiral Mike Mullen, the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Jim Stavridis, who's the head of the Fletcher School, and many high-profile generals and military leaders to say, this is a tiny investment, and if we don't make this small investment, we will sabotage the legacy of American leadership in the world, which has been really created
for
over
a penny.
these 70
when you
years.
think about it, I mean, for
it's
nothing,
a penny.
really.
It's literally a penny on the dollar of the budget.
Absolutely.
And so you do hear things like, oh, why is all our money going overseas? The foreign assistance budget is 1% of the U.S. budget. And of course, the new administration proposed a 30% cut, which would devastate not only foreign assistance, the feeding programs to the famines and so forth, but America's leadership role. Because when you cut 30% out of anything, you're cutting to the bone, and you're really taking a wrecking ball to it. And so Michelle Flournoy, the former Deputy Secretary of Defense, and Admiral Mike Mullen, they've been out there saying everybody needs to step up. And so the CARE Global Leaders Network is a way to do that. You can Google it, CARE Global Leaders Network. We have events going on throughout the year at embassies. We just came from the Embassy of Afghanistan. We'll be at the Embassy of Finland in February, at the Embassy of Australia in April, and then at Canada, at the Embassy of Canada in May. So it's really an opportunity to learn more about these issues, to meet national security leaders and business leaders who care about this, and learn about the humanitarian aid itself. And it can be very
and what it
inspiring.
means, and just the impact, as you said, you know, a penny to a dollar. I mean, it's amazing the impact.
So little money can do so much in these places.
And I see what, for women, to give an example, I mean, I see what going into a village in Nigeria and teaching women how to, you know, to perform plumbing, or to go and retrieve water from a well, and to create a well
Exactly.
It has a huge impact on the life of certainly the woman, but the family, the community, you know. I mean, what you all do, I mean, I know what it means, and
well, you know,
I
you
love
think
what
about
you,
well, thank you. You think about a crisis like Flint, where
Right,
they can't
right.
get. Well, this goes on all over the world, and access to clean water means sanitation. If you don't have those basics, how can you possibly sustain yourself? And so it starts there, and then it's empowering, for instance, farmers, women farmers in Nigeria and in Southern Africa, making sure they have the seeds. So once they have the seeds and there's enough water, they can support the family. Then they have enough to buy a goat or to buy a cow. And we start these village savings and loans where they can pool their money and buy things. And, you know, it's amazing what that tiny amount of money for us,
and
the difference that it makes. And, you know, it makes such a good impression across the world for this country and what we stand for. We don't want to be dropping bombs. We want to be helping. We want to be helping people in communities lift themselves up, and it's the generals and the admirals who are out there saying this. That's what the CARE Global Leaders Network is.
So going back to, I'm fascinated with indigo.
I
mean, do they export? Is it become now an export?
It is.
Product.
It's a fair trade export
particularly
product.
for as a fertilizer, as a, I mean,
well,
it's used for
the indigo itself.
Soil enrichment. I mean.
Yes. So the indigo itself is grown, and then they harvest it, and that's when the making of the scarves. It's turned into dye. Right. And that's very labor intensive, and a lot of men and women are involved in that. Then the dye is used on these silk scarves and the designing of these scarves. Meanwhile, that indigo enriches the soil, and so that land can then be rotated with food crops.
That's interesting.
And so the indigo growing enriches the soil so that, you know, I think part of farming responsibly and sustainably in these areas is kind of rotating these crops so you don't wear out the soil, deplete the soil.
Well, yeah, that happens all the time. Do you travel? Do you travel a lot, Beth? I mean, do you find that?
I have traveled quite a bit since starting at CARE. Earlier this year, I had an amazing trip to the West Bank and Gaza.
Wow.
And then into Jordan to the Syrian border to see the refugee camps. And it was just... It was a life changer.
Yeah, it's a life changer.
It's a life changer, and helping the Palestinians, you know, to see what goes on there in Gaza. I mean, basically an outdoor prison. I mean, it was. I had been to Afghanistan before, and Afghanistan is a life changer too. But I have to say, after going to the West Bank and Gaza and Jerusalem and to the Syrian border, I mean, I'll never be the same. And you get a whole different perspective on the world when you travel to these places. And so I recommend it to everyone. In fact, CARE has a program in which you can travel with CARE to see this work.
Oh, that would be
and we should get you to come on one of those trips,
I'd love
Chris.
to. I used to do that a lot, and I'd love to go back into it. Yeah.
In fact, this is a program that the Gates Foundation funds, is to help journalists and members of Congress and so forth get out into the world, because, you know, we do get caught in our bubble in the United States. You can't help it. You're following CNN, you're following the news, and the rest of the world sort of fades into the background. Unless you're
and we don't
really
have any
paying
idea.
Attention. But to get outside the world gives you, it just is so enriching to your perspective. And then, of course, it also makes you realize what a miracle this country is and how well this country works. In such a large organization, you're kind of getting the message out in many different ways, as many ways as you can. I mean, when the famines, we got together with other aid organizations and did a kind of a coalition effort this summer about the famines in South Sudan and Nigeria and Yemen. Quite honestly, I mean, it's hard to get people's attention.
It's hard to get people to,
And what we've also noticed is, you know, it's, depending on how you present this, it's depressing, and we
Yeah,
don't.
it is depressing. Yeah.
So you need to get people's attention, but we also need to show people the positive differences, the positive things that are going on. I heard an interesting talk by First Lady Rula Ghani when she was in town recently, First Lady of Afghanistan, and someone asked her, "What do you say to people who say, you know, we have poured so much money into Afghanistan and treasure and blood, you know, our soldiers.
Yeah.
How do you make the case to the American people that we should keep doing this?" And she paused a moment and she said, well, let us remember that the architect of the 9/11 attacks was living in Afghanistan when those attacks were planned. And when we let countries disintegrate into mayhem and lawlessness, you know, those problems end up on our doorstep. Refugee crises. We have more refugees now in this world than at any time. Well, that doesn't happen by accident. It happens when no one's paying attention and we don't deal with these underlying to let people suffer in other places. We just can't let that be okay. So on the one hand, there's a practical rationale of we don't want more refugees, we don't want more wars, and if we make these small investments, we mitigate against those. We can prevent extremism from taking hold, right? Desperate people do desperate things. We don't ever want to get there. So these small investments, you know, there's a very practical case for making them. Another way I think we could talk with people about this is who we are as Americans. You know, this is the core of what we stand for in this world. And for a very small commitment, you can be part of supporting that legacy. And that's a deep thing. If you're patriotic, if you care about this country and what is our role in the world, it's another reason to take an interest and pay attention. And then I think the benefits of it, when you start to see how much you can help people around the world, it's a wonderful feeling. I mean, this is the first time I've worked for a large international charitable organization. I've really been in the business world in Washington for most of my career. And I feel so good every day when I go to work, Chris, because I know that no matter what happened during that day at work, and we all have good days and bad days at work, but you know at the end of that day that you were helping people. And even just that intention. I mean, I get to go out into the world each day and say, okay, I'm just going to help people today. And when you're able, and I don't think everyone needs to work for a charitable organization to sort of go into the world that way, but when you start your day and say,
makes a difference.
I'm just going to help somebody in a small way today. It really changes your life, and it gives you a reason to live and a great reason to get up in the morning, and go to work, and you do make that difference. And so, working with CARE, getting involved with CARE, that's the kind of feeling you can have. Knowing that you're part of something bigger and something that's helping a lot of people.
And with that, I wish we could talk more. But Beth, kudos and thank you for all your service, and you've inspired me. You know, this has been wonderful.
Well, thank you so much for your interest, Chris, and all you're doing. Democracy relies on great journalism, and this is a real community service.
No, thank you, Beth. You have to come back.
I will.
Talk about some of your trips.
Excellent. Look forward to it.
You've been watching The Next Word. You can catch us 6 nights a week, and hope you enjoyed this conversation. Good night.